back to the Point of Order podcast, an inside look at California politics and the state legislature. I'm your host, Assemblyman Josh Hoover from District 7, and we're joined again today by Assemblymember Joe Patterson from District 5. How's it going?
Great. Beautiful day. It's starting to get hot, though. So
yeah, it is actually. It's actually kind of warm in here, too. So we were supposed to have Assemblywoman Kate Sanchez on this week, what's been happening ever since that I started. So a few weeks ago, I started announcing in the previous podcast who's going to be on next week. And every single one of those people has had to cancel. So
funny.
I think I need to stop doing that. But yeah, Assemblywoman Kate Sanchez got called into Judiciary Committee this week. And so thank you for stepping in and joining us again.
No,
I appreciate it.
Never miss an opportunity to talk more.
Exactly right. So we'll jump right into it with the weekly recap. I think this episode's going to be a little shorter because it's such a busy week, and I know we've all got a lot going on. There was some pretty big Assembly leadership changes since the last podcast launch. We have a new Assembly Speaker in California, Robert Rivas from Salinas. He also named Assemblywoman Cecilia Aguiar-Curry from Winters as the Speaker Pro Tem, and then Assemblyman Isaac Bryan from Los Angeles as the new Majority Leader for the Democratic Caucus. And then we had some committee shakeups too. So Assembly Local Government Committee has a new committee chair with Assemblyman Juan Carrillo from Palmdale. And then the Agriculture Committee will now be chaired by Assemblywoman Esmeralda Soria. And then let's see, what else? Oh, Elections Committee, Gail Pellerin, which actually Assemblywoman Gail Pellerin, who used to be a county clerk, so she knows a lot about elections. What are your thoughts on the leadership stuff, and do you expect any changes moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I had I think as good of a relationship as a Republican could have with the last speaker, which met with him. I didn't agree with him on 90% of things, right? But we talked on stuff, and now Mr. Rivas, we get along. I don't know what his speakership style is going to be. Yeah. I had a little conversation with him yesterday. He really does seem genuine in wanting to work with people and be fair, and not that. I'm ever going to agree with him on a lot of the policies that come out of this place. Yeah. But if you can at least make Sacramento, place where people get along and still can respectfully disagree, even vehemently disagree on issues, and that's a good thing. And so,
when we kind of broke down his speech on the podcast last week with my guests that I had last week, and one thing he did say in his swearing in speech, I guess, was that fixing some of the biggest problems that we have might require talking with someone you don't always agree with or something to that effect, right? Which I appreciated. And I do think that's true. I think we got to come together on this stuff. So, it'll be interesting to see. I'm interested to see if we get more. I assume we're going to get more leadership shakeups in terms of the committee chairs, maybe after this session or later in this session. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. Another big story, Cal Matters. Well, actually, a lot of places reported on it. But I was going to bring up this story about violent crime in California. This one Cal Matters editorial by Dan Walters, title is "Annual Crime Report Shows Californians' Fear of Increasing Crime is Justified," because the Public Policy Institute of California, I think it was. The Attorney General data came out, the annual crime report came out, and it revealed the state's violent crime rate has increased by 6.1% since 2021, and property crime has increased 6.2%, while homicides dipped slightly, robberies jumped 10.2%. And the Attorney General put out a kind of quiet statement about this report that said, while crime rates remain significantly below their historical highs, property and violent crime continues to have devastating consequences for communities across the state, and gun violence remains a major threat to public safety. What are your thoughts on the the crime uptick. Are you surprised at all?
No, not at all. I mean, what was interesting, I was just talking with another assembly member about this yesterday, but you always hear from Democrats that crime rates are historically low from 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, what happened to cause that? If oddly, the same year that 3 strikes rule took effect, and also we started putting people in prison for committing crime, which we basically don't do, for even stealing stuff these days. Oh my gosh, the crime rate started dropping almost instantly when the 3 strikes law was like, oh. And right when early release started occurring, and then when Prop 47 passed, almost instantly you see crime start to tick up again. Believe it or not, penalizing people actually has an effect on the crime rate in going down. It is a deterrence, and yeah, it's historically low. But when you just look at from the 90s and when we brought in 3 strikes, and then just almost instantly it goes down.
Yeah,
that means something.
No, I totally agree. So PPIC, the Public Policy Institute of California, has also done some surveys on this topic, right? And one of the recent polls, I thought this was interesting, found that among racial and ethnic groups, Black Californians express the highest level of concern about crime. Women are more concerned than men, and Republicans more than Democrats or independent voters. But I feel like when we're having these conversations in committee, and neither one of us are on the Public Safety Committee, but when we're having conversations about crime in the legislature, we're always trying to raise those flags and talk about that, and the reasons that are always used to pass bills that are decriminalizing these things are to somehow support Black Californians, but Black Californians are the ones that are saying that they're the most concerned about crime. I mean, I just think we're forgetting that crime actually impacts the very communities that these bills are supposedly trying to help. And I think that's one of the things that frustrates me the most too.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, it's disturbing that, maybe in a place like where I live, the crime rates are lower than, let's say, Sacramento, or I don't even know if that's true, but let's just say, clearly people in Sacramento are going to be more concerned about crime, but it's like we're addressing the issue. They're trying to keep people out of prison, basically, who can have a life in the in the future. And I don't think that's a bad perspective to have. Most people will get out of prison at some point. But when you're letting people out after half their sentences, or you're not even sending people to prison who go in and steal $950 here, $950 there, $950 there, that's going to cause an increase in crime,
Is it going to have a electoral or political effect, do you think? I mean, does this if this continues to be a trend in California? I mean, I think historically we've seen that, people vote on this issue. People vote on public safety. I know my district, this is probably one of the top issues, is, are our neighborhoods actually safe? And if our policies are not meeting that expectation, I think we're going to have to see some changes.
I think in swing districts, unfortunately, you being in one of those, I do like think mine, that could matter. But also, I think where a lot of the crime is happening in certain parts of California, those are safe seats for a lot of legislators. And so it's hard to envision it having a major impact in those areas.
Yeah, that's a good point. To your point about early release, I've got a gentleman, dad in my district that I worked with on some legislation this year to get justice for his daughter. But his daughter, Ryla, we named it Ryla's Law, but she was killed by a child care worker when she was in 2019. She was like 1 year old. The person pleaded guilty to the crime, was sentenced to 10 years, and is going to get out in less than 3. I mean, you have someone that's fessing up to a terrible, terrible crime that is then being sentenced to, I think what most people would agree is a justified sentence, getting out in less than 3 years. And our bill was trying to change that so that, she would at least have to serve, the time that she was sentenced to, or on regular, she would not be able to qualify for early release credits, but that bill didn't pass the Public Safety Committee. So it's crazy.
Which is not surprising.
Yeah.
And you go through the legislature, at least in the Assembly, I don't know where it's in the Senate, changed the definition of what prison is for. And it was to rehabilitate people. I actually have the crazy idea that for some people, prison should be intended to actually punish them. When you kill a child, you deserve to go to prison. I'm not really so wrapped up if you get rehabilitated during that prison term. I mean, I'd like to see when you get out, you can be a productive member of society.
Sure.
But you need to pay your debt to society for killing a kid. Good Lord, what is wrong with this place?
It's so maddening. This will be an ongoing topic on this podcast, I'm sure. And I'm sure I think we've talked about it almost every time that you've been on. But let's move on to the next topic. I want to talk about housing. This was, kind of a huge week for housing policy. So I was here until 10 o'clock last night in Natural Resources Committee, where we heard two major housing bills, SB 423 and SB 4. SB 423 being the big one. These bills came before your committee. You're the vice chair of the Housing Committee prior to my committee in Natural Resources. But I kind of just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the hearing last night, because it was kind of crazy. One of the crazier things I've experienced since being here, but also just like the bill. So like SB 423, I don't know if you can give us a little overview on that bill, but why do you first of all, I'll just read the summary of the bill. So from the committee analysis, that's the wrong bill. SB 423 extends and expands the right of approval, for example, not subject to the California Environmental Quality Act or other discretionary review by the relevant city or county of both affordable and market rate multifamily housing projects pursuant to SB 35, which was chaptered back in 2017. It extends the sunset date on these provisions, relax certain labor requirements, expands to parcels where parking is a permitted use, and this is a big one, and removes the exclusion of the coastal zone, which was kind of one of the big parts of SB 35. Tell us a little bit about SB 423 and why you think we need this policy in California.
Well, as a former city council member, I mean, I do support maintaining some local discretion on how communities are built. But what SB 423 did is, if a jurisdiction says this area should be housing, it should be housing, then the local governments can't come in and say like, oh, well, we don't like, the way the roof angle is, and so we're going to deny the project. And in fact, in San Francisco, just a couple weeks ago, actually the night before it was heard in the committee I sit on, San Francisco opposed a 10-unit project in a housing zone because it blocked the shade of a playground, or it would create shade over this playground that was nearby. I mean, so these are projects that the community has already decided should be housing. Yeah. So it doesn't take away local control. It stops the bureaucrats from taking away actually your property rights to build housing on where they said housing. But I want to talk about the environmental quality stuff for a little bit. Republicans were the ones that signed CEQA. So Republicans have led on environmental issues for a very long time. But we've figured out that it needs to be fixed and it needs to be reformed. But when you're putting a project in an area that's already zoned for housing, there has already been CEQA documents for it. The city has already done the environmental review. And so you want to put, 30 units an acre instead of 25 units an acre. You shouldn't have to do an EIR addendum and go get through discretionary review just for a modest change like that. And so that's what 423 was trying to do. And they tried to pretend last night like, hey, this gets rid of environmental protections. No, the CEQA document was already done. The EIR was already done. It actually, we're just taking into account what's already been done. So what the legislature has turned into on housing is basically environmentalists and the Coastal Commission. A state agency is basically redlining the state and saying, poor people can't live here.
Along the coast.
Working class people can't live along the coast. That's a state agency.
But they're using the environment as the excuse. They're using the environment as cover for this. But here's the craziest part to me, and I actually wrote a pretty long tweet last night. I was a little worked up. And And I said, disingenuous environmental special interests will continue to make our state more expensive and housing less affordable until we develop the political will to do what is necessary. But the author of the bill made this point as well in his close. But I said, yes, it is disingenuous to block or damage reasonable housing policy in the name of the environment while some Californians are commuting hours per day. And this is the part that's crazy to me. They're emitting more carbon by driving 50, 60, 80 miles per day to work because they can't afford to live near their job. And yet we have environmental special interests that are coming in and saying they're protecting the environment by blocking affordable housing that's going to be near their place of employment, that's going to reduce carbon. I don't understand it. I honestly don't understand it.
They are environmental extremists. They're terrorists. The reality is building dense housing in places where there's already density, like San Francisco. It helps the environment to build more housing. It doesn't make any sense for us to be pushing. Look, Rockland, we never denied a project the entire time I was on the city council. I mean, I opposed a couple of them that were rezones and things, but pushing more houses out into the suburbs actually increases, the pollution in the air.
Yeah, sure.
So if people who work at the hotels and all those kinds of things that are on the coast can't get a house there, they're just commuting in and polluting more. Yeah. But the other thing with this group that the author also pointed out in the housing committee was none of these groups have come to the table and say, this is the kind of housing legislation we would support to streamline, because they're actually not interested in that.
No, they're not.
They're interested in stopping all development, and
absolutely.
They're more concerned about, there's no rationale. I mean, I can't even
there is a rationale if you really dig deeper, right? The reality is that more housing means more people, means more pollution. This is why that they block, I believe, this is why that they oppose housing projects. I believe this is why they oppose water infrastructure, because they know that if they can stop water infrastructure, you can't build housing without water, right? So if you can stop water infrastructure, you're stopping housing. This is about controlling the population in California. And the reality is that, they're not willing to say that out loud. They're not willing to say that out loud, but they're using the environment to channel kind of the same, NIMBY arguments that we've heard for years and years and years in a new form. And they've kind of taken the mantle up on this. And so I don't know. I think it's extremely disingenuous. I was sitting in committee last night, very frustrated that we have bipartisan, coalition of people trying to get housing built in California. And we can't, we're getting this much pushback because of the special interest in Sacramento. Look, we talk a lot about affordability in our state. We have the highest poverty rate in the nation, second highest unemployment rate. We're the second most expensive state in the nation to live, with, I think, the second highest median home price. And that, obviously doesn't include DC, but that's not actually a state. So, among the states, we're the second most expensive place in the nation to live. And we're not going to fix that problem without building additional supply. I mean, it's a supply and demand issue, and we have to build supply. And so my district, I know your district's building. My district's building like crazy. But what we need all hands on deck in communities across California. And we need communities to, we need everyone on board to help solve this affordability problem that we have.
Yeah.
And so, and for me, this is really about the next generation. I want my kids to be able to afford to live in California. I want their kids to be able to afford to live in California. And we've made it so incredibly difficult to afford housing. I'm afraid, we're going to just continue to see people leaving. I don't know if you saw the story, but we're projected to lose 5 more congressional seats by 2030 when they redistrict. Okay. Why is that? Because people are leaving. A lot of the folks in this building want to deny that people are leaving California, but we are projected to lose 5 more seats. We just lost 1 in the last cycle for the first time in our history. And then we could lose 5 more in the next 10 years because people, there's a lot of reasons for why people are leaving. Don't get me wrong, but one of them is cost of living.
Oh, absolutely. Almost every single person that I know that's left California, they sell their house with a nice nest egg, and they go buy a mansion in some other state,
right.
And look, and we're not talking about, hey, let's put, massive apartments in every single, like single family development throughout, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about government, including local governments, need to get out of the way of where the city has already determined there should be housing.
Yeah.
So the community has already done all the stakeholder engagement, has already talked to people. They say, we need to have housing in these spots, but they want to maintain this weird control over, what the door colors are or whatever, And it's like, just get out of the way. You've already made the decision you want it to be housing.
Yeah, this needs to be housing.
Just stop,
Well, and that's the thing. And I think there's a lot more we need to do in addition to these bills to reduce the cost of building housing. We pour all kinds of fees and, all kinds of stuff on builders. And that's also one of the reasons housing's more expensive in California. But I think that's an important distinction. It's not, we're not just talking about building affordable housing, which is kind of a key word, that a lot of folks talk about in this building. We're talking about building housing affordably.
No.
And that includes market rate housing.
Let me give you an example. In my district, in my town, there's a special district. And they are a sewer district, right? They will charge $14,000. It might have gone up this year too. $14,000 to connect to the sewer system, whether you're a 200 square foot apartment or a 10,000 square foot house. It is the same exact amount. So a mansion pays the same amount as mom and dad or college student trying to rent an apartment. And I'll have the development community all the time. Hey, that's a huge portion of my budget. But what, $14,000 to hook your, toilet up to the plumbing system? It's crazy. And I think that's not sustainable.
Yeah.
And I think things like that are coming to an end.
Yeah. Before you even put a foundation in the ground, when your costs are, in the around
six figures,
6 figures. It's true. I hear this from, my district builders all the time. We start at like 100,000 in costs. And that's before we even lay the foundation. Yeah. How are people supposed to afford those homes?
I think that every person should know that it's anywhere from $50,000 to $150,000 to put a shovel in the ground for your house. And who's paying for that? It's the people buying the houses.
You are. The property owner, right? Or the property purchaser. It's nuts. More supply in California is going to lower rental costs too. If we can fix the supply and demand problem. Plus, I think for me, we need to give more people the opportunity to build generational wealth through home ownership. So this was LA Times recently reported this on housing. In California in 2021, the Latino home ownership rate stood at 45.6% compared to 64.5% for white families. The Black home ownership rate stood at 35.5%, according to, this is census data analyzed by the Public Policy Institute of California. What better way to help people build generational wealth than home ownership? I don't think there is one. And yet we have made home ownership almost impossible in California for an average, middle class family. And so, I think that's what drives me so much too, is again, I want my kids to be able to start building that equity and building that wealth. Every family should have that opportunity to live out that California dream, and they just don't.
Yeah, what was the average price of a house in California? Like 700 and some thousand or 800,000?
It's somewhere. I think I was looking at different lists last night, but it was somewhere between 750 and 850 in terms of the median home price in California. That was the median.
That's crazy. But so
but the average, might be a little lower than that.
Yeah. But either way. This isn't when I bought my first house in 2008, which isn't like a generation ago. Yeah. Now it's 15 years ago, but it was $309 for a 2,500 square foot house, in a brand new development, family atmosphere. This is just 15 years ago. So we're not talking about, again, taking away property values from people who've really built that nest egg, right? That's another thing. People have built the nest egg, but building some more homes so somebody can buy a house for, $500,000 is not like a crazy,
no, I don't
crazy
think,
thought.
I don't think it's crazy at all. Another bill we debated last night was SB4, which is a little bit different. That one is more specific to allowing faith communities to use their property to build affordable housing units, and kind of reducing restrictions for that. I think the reason I wanted to bring it up is more on process, what happened last night. So we debated this SB 423 first, which is this kind of broader housing bill. It was pretty clear during the debate that the author of the bill had the votes to get it passed, even though the chair of the committee said that she was not going to support the bill. Now, this is something. Have you seen this at all this year?
This is the first time I've heard of this happening.
I have not seen this since I've been here.
Yeah,
since I've been elected. So the chair of a committee, generally speaking, controls what happens in the committee.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how it works. This chair basically said, "I don't support this bill on the dais unless you do these things." He wasn't willing to do all of the things. So you had a number of members that basically said they couldn't support the bill without those things. But it was also very clear that, the author had at least 2 or 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans and potentially 4 Democrats after all the comments were made. And he needed 6 votes to get the bill passed. So it was actually really interesting because one of my Democratic colleagues on the committee made the motion and really pushed the motion to actually pass the bill. He did propose some amendments that were pretty reasonable amendments, but they were not, to solve some of the clear challenges, but they were not the amendments the committee wanted, right? And so another member of the committee did that and proposed that with those amendments. I think one of the Republicans seconded that, and that's what we voted on. And we passed the bill with 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans. It was pretty wild.
Yeah.
And I have not seen that happen. Yeah, that was my first experience with that. So we got through that, and then SB4 came up, which I thought from the chair of the committee's perspective was going to be an easier bill because it's much more narrow. It's not, it's not as broad as SB 423 to allow faith institutions to build housing on their property. They paused before the vote, they paused to go back and negotiate more amendments. And the author agreed to that. Fine. By the way, it was 4 hours before we would hear the bill again. So we started this committee at about 3:00 and we left at 10:00 last night. So it was pretty crazy. But at about 9:30, the author of the bill of SB4 comes back in with a deal that they thought they had on SB4. That deal gets immediately tossed out the window when he starts talking by the committee. And so we're sitting there debating this bill. I guess I bring all this up to say, I don't think this is how public policy is supposed to be made. And it was very frustrating to see a deal was reached. We came in and then it got a little pushback and then it got thrown out the window. And so what ended up happening is you had the Republicans, pretty upset about it because what they essentially did, and I talked to some of the folks supporting the bill afterwards, they basically required in the bill that you would have had to require 3,200 feet or something from any housing project to some industrial project that required an airborne permit. The problem with that, and you can talk about this, but if you look at the places we're trying to build the housing in Los Angeles specifically, it basically makes the bill moot in a lot of those areas because they're never going to be able to meet those requirements.
It's, first of all, I want to say that I was not supportive of that bill. I mean, just kind of get that out of the way. And the reason is because it did in a community like mine and yours too, where they're building houses.
Yeah.
I personally felt like, and I didn't oppose it. I just I laid off the bill for now, but to say, churches have by right, can get rid of all local control. To me, that was a little bit too much, but I can see sort of both sides of the argument for that. Because, a lot of churches are doing great things.
Yeah,
by the way.
Absolutely.
And community colleges too, by the way, and private universities. However, the process of how this committee played out is, the senator who authored the bill got a hearing because he's a Democrat. I had housing bills that were going to go before that committee. And I have a great deal of personal respect for the chair, but this is what kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I had the analysis done, everything ready to go. And then I get a call the morning of my hearing and say, by the way, we have proposed amendments, and if you don't take them, you can't even have a hearing.
Wow.
So I didn't even, despite all the analysis, all the work being done by the committee, they wouldn't. And so I said, hey, well, can we just do the hearing and we'll sort of talk about it? That wouldn't even let me present my idea.
Yep.
And by the way, my idea wasn't crazy. It was CEQA exemptions for forest clearing to prevent wildfires. And it's
crazy.
so not crazy. Even Governor Newsom did this by executive order, in 2019. So it's actually kind of a Democratic idea. But Republicans, hey, look, we have the fires in our districts,
Absolutely.
Right? We want to clear the forests and give a CEQA exemption. Wouldn't even give me a hearing. By the way, my district is almost burned down by the mosquito fire. The Caldor fire burned down significant portions of El Dorado County. So to not even give me a hearing,
I know.
But she did give the senator a hearing on these bills, and I think that's good. But it's really interesting that she was trying to get her way there.
She did on this one.
Yeah.
She definitely did on this one.
Oh.
And I think, honestly, again, the bill could still do some good, but I think it's basically the comment I got from someone that has a lot of internal knowledge on this. And I won't say who, but, was that, the bill now loses hundreds of thousands of acres, essentially. Where they can build housing under this bill. So.
There was a map of where all the oil wells were because it exempts them. And it is like all of Southern California has an oil well, 3,200 feet, which is like 3/4 of a mile or something, 60% of a mile.
Yeah.
And so
I'm probably going to post this in the show notes because I'll put it in the show notes for the podcast, but I have it bookmarked here. And it's nuts. It's like all of Los Angeles, you essentially can't use this bill.
The suburbs are not taking the housing for dense LA. It's just not happening.
No.
I mean, LA is where the majority of the population of California lives almost.
Yeah, they need to build housing for the people to live there.
So I am not exempting. I'm straight up going to oppose this bill most likely now because why do, so you're telling me churches in downtown LA that have massive holdings.
Yep.
For example, like the Catholic Church.
Yes.
Yep. They have no opportunity to build housing in downtown LA, but hey, El Dorado County, LA County, or El Dorado County, Placer County, no problem. Buy right over there.
It's crazy.
And I'm going to call it out so bad, and this isn't the author's problem. This isn't his fault.
No. This honestly,
is the committee's fault.
And if you watch the hearing, and again, I wouldn't necessarily recommend watching the hearing because it's probably a waste of your time. But if you go back and watch the hearing, this is obviously not something the author wanted. It was the direction the committee was pushing him, and if he was going to get his bill out, this is what he was going to have to take.
I would have said no.
Well, of course.
Take a motion on this bill.
Well, and that's the frustrating thing is we could have voted on this bill earlier on. There was actually a motion on the table to vote on it as is. And that just got dispensed with. I don't even think that's allowed. Parliamentary procedure. I don't think you can just dispense with a motion in a second. I think you actually have to.
Well, the chair didn't hear it.
You have to.
I
guess I don't know. I have to go back to my parliamentary procedure book and look into that. But anyway, I just wanted to really drive home the point that that's not how public policy is supposed to be made. And we're really these issues, this reasonable housing policy is being taken hostage by environmental special interests that. If they're honest, I don't think that they want housing in California, and they're using the environment to channel that. But it's very disingenuous to me, and we got to we got to develop some political will.
But I think it's really important to note that they have an ally, a very strong ally in a state agency, the Coastal Commission.
I know,
which is opposing. I don't understand why rich coastal elites are exempt from housing laws and the suburbs aren't.
It's a good point.
It just it drives me nuts. And look, they keep talking about sea rise. Look, nobody is more incentivized to not build in where the sea is going to be in 15 years than the property owner.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's just all nonsense. It's all nonsense.
It is. And I actually asked the Coastal Commission that in the hearing. I'm like, so you guys opposed this bill a month ago. This bill was introduced in like December, January. And then you come in to torpedo this bill a month before the hearing? That just screams that this wasn't about the environment. This was about stopping housing projects. This is about protecting the coast from housing, not from sea level rise, right?
Yeah, exactly. In fact, they actually opposed. So all these cities are required by the state to decide where they're going to put various housing, developments. And in San Diego, the Coastal Commission actually opposed the implementation of their ADU program because building homes in your in certain areas in your backyard or on the side of your property where there's also coastal access, deprives the public, in their view, the access of the beach. It didn't stop anybody from going from the beach. So you have one state agency coming in and saying, you can't build an ADU on your own property, which is already state law, by the way, and the city can't count that towards meeting affordable housing goals, obligations. Yeah. And then they come in now and say, hey, we're opposed to apartments too. It's like they're out of their mind. And if they're going to have legislation introduced next year, putting them in check.
I hope so.
Yeah.
You introducing the bill?
I don't know what, but somebody's going to.
No, they're out of control. There's no doubt about it. All right, I've kept you too long already. Quick looking ahead segment. We are now going on recess. This is actually our last week in legislative session. We're going to take a month off. And when we say off, that doesn't mean like we're actually going to be off. That just means we're going to be in our districts, which is where I want to be. That's where I prefer to be. And we'll be back in August to finish up some of these bills, appropriations deadlines, end of session, where we're going to be voting on thousands of bills. So the podcast is actually going to be taking a break for this recess, and then we will be back to talk about the final month of activities in an end of session in the legislature. So I was going to ask you, I'll ask you really quick because we don't have time for fun on this podcast, but I was going to ask you, who would you rather fight, Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg, if you had to fight one of them? I mean, seriously, because they're going to fight each other, but, supposedly.
Well, probably Mark,
I mean, you got to take the smaller guy. I mean, I'm going to have to take Mark too, but I think it's been really funny that's absolutely ridiculous. I hope
they do their cage match.
I do hope that happens, but it's absolutely ridiculous. It's definitely a sign of our times.
And it should go to charity.
Yeah.
They
should do pink slips for Twitter or Threads. Whoever wins gets the other.
Yeah, exactly.
Gets the other company. Yeah. Are you on Threads, by the way?
I am on Threads.
Yeah, I have not threaded. Oh God, that sounds so terrible.
Know.
I don't even know. Like, what is that? Like, I mean, I'm on it and I'm going to use it. So follow the podcast too. Point of Order Pod also on Threads. You can follow Point of Order Pod on Threads. They have a lot of
issues they need to figure out there.
Okay, really? I haven't really checked it out.
For example, yet, so if you followed me, I wouldn't be able to see that. I get a notification that you followed me, but if you get a lot of notifications, you don't. Okay. Like when I click on my followers, I can't tell if you are or not, or can't tell if I'm following you. For example, there's also no sense to the timeline. They'll get all that worked out. I mean, I'm a Twitter guy. So,
you'll have to pry Twitter from my cold dead hands probably. Exactly. But anyway, no, I don't really have any announcements other than the fact that we're going to be back in a month. And you can follow us now on Threads, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at Point of Order Pod. You can watch and subscribe on YouTube at Point of Order Pod. If you have any ideas for future shows, you can email us at pointoforderpod@gmail.com. And you can follow Joe and I. I am on Twitter and Threads. I'm at Joshua_Hoover. Are you the same on Threads as you are on Twitter? No. So it's at Patterdude on Twitter or Threads for Joe Patterson as well. Thanks for coming back, Joe.
Well, thanks.
Appreciate it. See you later.